at that time, I was more interested in big back bends and handstands than I was in the subtle body experience. But the further I went into my yoga practice, the more obvious it became that an advanced practitioner isn't the one that can do a handstand. The advanced practitioner is the one that can sense the most subtle experience within.
Welcome to the Healing Cocoon. I'm Jacobie Gray, soul alignment and success coach and energy healer, which means I can intuit the subtle layers of your energy field to promote ultimate health and well-being. My goal for this podcast is to shed light on the healing journey itself and help you feel more supported as you embark on the process of unpacking your past to consciously create your present and start living the life of your dreams. Through the study of coaching, kinesiology, holographic kinetics, meditation, Reiki, the chakra system, and many other modalities, I've learned how to release the blocks that were holding me back. Now I'd love to help you do the same. By embarking on your own self-healing process, you'll see the world transforming around you in ways you never thought possible. You'll begin to experience more connection, clarity, love, fulfillment, synchronicity, and success than you've ever had before. So welcome to the Ascension. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to the Healing Cocoon podcast for another week. Today's guest, I'm super excited. If you've been listening to the podcast, I have been talking about the yoga teacher training that I did in 2017, and I've brought in a lot of people who I was so blessed to go through that training with. But today I get to speak to the guide, my mentor, my star child inspiration, Jana Roemer. She, when you're just inexplicably, is that how you say it? Unexplainably, let's just put it that way, drawn to someone. And I first encountered Jana when I was living on Rose Avenue in Venice, California, and I was living above Cafe Gratitude. I mean, Rose Avenue in itself and Venice is such a hub for alternative lifestyle stuff. And across the road was a little store called Moon Juice, which I was completely obsessed with. So there was underneath my house on Rose Avenue, my apartment, there was Cafe Gratitude, and there was a little yoga studio called the Yoga Collective. And I used to go to yoga there. And I don't know if I should admit this, but I'm really bad with names. And I never bothered to really look at who the teachers were. All I knew, well, as in their names, all I knew is that at a certain time, like 5 o'clock on a Friday, I would go and I would have this amazing class with this amazing teacher who I absolutely adored. And then one day I showed up and she'd gone. She'd completely disappeared and I couldn't find her and I didn't know her name. But by this stage, I'd gotten myself a job across the road at Moon Juice because I was so obsessed with their product, and that would be my dream. Let's put it out there to one day get Amanda Chantel Bacon onto the podcast because what she's created with Moon Juice is so freaking cool. But I got a job there because I was obsessed with the product and everything behind it. And I wanted to learn more about adaptogens. And I got this job and I was working with this really cool girl who one day, Jana, who I didn't know her name, walks in with her cute son, Freddie, and they have a whole conversation. And when she leaves, I'm like, who is that lady? Who is she? I need to know who she is. I need to find where she does yoga. And my friend was like, oh, that's Jana. I babysit her son. And I was like, please, where does she do yoga? And she said, at Love Yoga. She's moved to Love Yoga and I'm just getting a job managing there and totally come along to the classes. And it was just this beautiful thing where I tracked her down. I started attending her classes. I think at that stage she'd even incorporated yoga nidra. So you'd do a 1 hour yoga class followed by a half-hour nidra, which was complete heaven. And then I was an absolute devotee of Jana's classes, and which led me to then taking her yoga teacher training in 2017 after my marriage had dissolved and I had decided that that was something I absolutely needed to do for my healing, and it really was. So Jana has, at the moment, has this beautiful company, and the way that her creativity is expressing itself right now is through Attune to the Moon. And she has this beautiful thing in her bio, and it says, "In search for a teacher, I found the stars. In the stars, I found light in a dark space. I recognize that they reflect what resides within. This map has become invaluable to my life, and I want to share that understanding with you." So Jana, not only being an incredible yoga teacher and yoga nidra mentor and guide, is also an incredible astrologer. And Attune to the Moon is based around astrology. And she does, I won't even attempt to talk about it right now because I'll butcher it, but she describes exactly what that is in the podcast. But you can find all the details to go and explore that for yourself in the show notes. But Jana is a Libra Sun with a Virgo Stellium, and written all over her chart are notes of being an orator, leader, gatherer of souls, and devoted mystic, which is confirmed by the way she lives her life. And she's here to evoke transformation through practices of self-love. And after a decade of facilitating 200 and 300-hour teacher trainings, Jana is devoted to training guides of the ancient practice of Yoga Nidra, as well as continuing to develop her own signature blend of astrology and Yoga Nidra, the Astro Nidras, which are so powerful, and you should absolutely check them out. So she creates Yoga Nidra meditations now aligned with the stars. Anyway, I could literally go on forever. I feel like nothing that I could say could really do justice to my gratitude for having this woman in my life and as a wisdom keeper and a guide. So without further ado, Jana Roemer.
You know, I have to be totally honest. I grew up in a really idyllic environment. I don't suffer from childhood trauma. I was never abused. There was never sexual abuse. Like none of those things. That's not my story. I was raised on an acreage in the middle of nowhere with a mom who is unconditionally loving and just absolutely wonderful. And my healing journey wasn't so much of a childhood trauma, but just a complete flatness of life and dissatisfaction of knowing that I'm here for a reason, knowing that I have qualities that are meant to be shared. Like I've always known that I have big purpose. That's never been a question for me, and not doing it. And so my healing crisis really began in the recognition of life wasted.
That's actually really cool, because I know there are a lot of people out there who feel a similar thing. They're like, okay, everything's fine. I've achieved the things that society's told me I'm meant to achieve, and I'm deeply unhappy and I don't understand why.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the American dream. No matter where you live in the Western world, the American dream still applies. You know, for me, I moved out of the house, went to university. We call it university in Canada, not college. Went to university, got the degree. You know, I had fun. I had boyfriends. Everything was the way it was supposed to be. And I had a job with one of the best employers in Canada using my degree. You know, I was doing all the things, and I was just so deeply unsatisfied. When my alarm would go off to go to work in the morning, I'd cry and just be like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Like
And what did you train? What did you study at university? What did you study?
I have a business degree.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, so I was going to go into education. And I remember when I was doing the classes to get into education at the university, and I was just like, but I don't want to be stuck to a teacher's salary. No offense to all the teachers out there, but I didn't see myself in a world where I was going to be salaried for my life. That I grew up with an entrepreneurial father who experienced huge ups and downs over the course of his career, you know, like lost a business and the whole thing. And so I knew the path of an entrepreneur, and I knew the potential of an entrepreneur. And so when I knew teaching was my thing, I started teaching when I was 12 years old, teaching 4, 5, and 6-year-olds how to skate. and teaching just came so naturally to me. And so I knew that was it, but then I went into the business world, and that made more sense, especially because my dad is an entrepreneur, was like, no, get a business degree. You can do anything if you have a business degree. And I was like, okay. But the whole time I was in university, I studied psychology. So all of the possible electives that I could take in psychology, I took psychology. And then I also really loved human resource management and marketing and just understanding the nature of the mind. And so that was also always there. And then, when I finished university, I worked at WestJet, an airline, in their marketing department, in, a job that I ended up getting because I was a flight attendant, and the head of that department was on my flight, and I just happened to have a conversation with her, and she was like, we're hiring. And I was like, mind if I sit down next to you? And I just like talked my way into the job, really, like she was like, well, get your resume in and I'll flag it. And of course I got hired. But I was miserable. I hated it.
Yeah. And so at that point, how did you expand beyond that? What were the first steps that you took to get yourself out of that situation?
Well, I mean, gosh, it's so crazy to try and pinpoint it to a moment, because it was never a moment. It's an accumulation of moments where all of a sudden I'm there. Like when I was in my first year, I don't remember, earlier university, I took a religious studies course because I wasn't raised in a religion. My parents didn't. I've been to church maybe 10 times. I don't have that indoctrination. It's not part of my consciousness, but everybody does. And I was really fascinated by it. And so I took a course, and it was a 0.6 course. So it went all year long. And for the first half of the year, we studied Western, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then in the second half of the year, we did Eastern religions. So Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism and Taoism and all that kind of stuff. And I was very fascinated by the spiritual experience, and also equally, and I'm sorry if this triggers anybody, but equally fascinated with the human desire to attach to a story or a system or a structure to make sense of something that is so nonsensical. And of all of the different religions that I literally just like peeked into, it was Buddhism for me. I was like, okay, this makes sense. They don't call themselves, like, Buddhism, it doesn't claim to be a religion. It's a technology and a science. And so I was like, okay, this makes good sense to me. And I have a book of poetry that nobody's ever seen or barely even mentioned in my whole life, but it came out of that time of like so deeply seeking. And I was traveling a lot, and traveling was a big part of my escape from my own misery. And I was a pretty sober traveler. So when you think of like backpackers partying, that wasn't really the way that I went. And so I think I did suffer from social anxiety. I did suffer from, like, not clinical depression, but depressive states. And it was travel and poetry and studying different spirituality that started to pull me out of that.
So during this time, you're at business school, and you have this poetry that's kind of a little secret that you have with yourself, and you're getting into good relationship with yourself, really. And at what point did you start the yoga journey?
My yoga journey started in philosophy, in that religious studies class. And I used to go and oh my God, this is so funny. So I went to university in Saskatoon, and I used to I'd climb this fence and break into the space underneath the bridge. And I would crawl. You know how bridges have like arcs? So this bridge had like 3 or 4 arcs, and I would climb the inside of the bridge and go sit like right in the middle of the bridge over the river. And that's where I did a lot of my writing, and I smoked a lot of weed there as well by myself. And I was so deeply into the philosophy of yoga that it never even dawned on me to get on my mat and do a pose. That wasn't what it was. It was always the philosophy. And so for me, it's always been understanding the nature of the mind, understanding like in Buddhism, they say you're your own best therapist. And that was really like that self-inquiry, and that like, why do I think the way that I think, or why do I believe the things that I believe? Like that started so long ago. And you can see I've made a whole career out of that, like that's my whole
Yeah.
thing, is like questioning reality
Yeah.
and doing everything we
Yeah.
can to free ourselves of the delusion of this
Mm.
human experience.
Yeah. And I mean, that process of you finding your way from full-time marketer to full-time yoga teacher, on one hand, people might be like, oh, okay, so you totally transitioned your life and you transformed yourself and you found the golden egg. But what people don't realize, I guess, is that then opens up a whole other journey, and the healing process becomes a different one of the expansion of consciousness, and then the ups and downs and the dark nights of the soul. And I know you broke your back at one phase, and figuring out like how to come back from that. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how you navigated the ups and downs of stepping into a fully conscious path.
Yeah, so you mentioned breaking your back. So I was in denial that I could live a life that allowed me to have this be my number one focus, but it's really all my soul was begging for. And so I was working. At that point, I'd quit the job at WestJet and I'd gone traveling, and I came back and I worked at an event company. And the event company was like this horribly toxic environment. And I decided to quit. And the day I quit, my then boyfriend at the time was out of town. And I went with a crew of his friends out to Jasper, which is a ski hill. And I broke my back. And I just moved to a new city, and I was taken by ambulance. It's like an epically long, crazy story about breaking my back. But I was taken by ambulance by myself to a city where I knew nobody, left on a stretcher in the hallway of a emergency room. And somewhere, and I was so drugged up at this point, somewhere in transition, they didn't pass the message on that I needed care to somebody. So I ended up getting tucked away and left.
With a broken back.
Yeah. And nobody actually admitted me to the hospital. And I woke up and I was
Were you in pain?
yeah, I was going to
Like,
say,
this
well,
is
I was well
crazy.
drugged. And by the time I woke up, I was in
Oh, okay,
so
the
much
drugs.
pain. And where I broke my back, it's right where my diaphragm connects. So it literally took my breath away. And I was trying to get somebody's attention because I had been forgotten. I was like, excuse me. And I couldn't get a voice out. I was like, excuse me. Can somebody help me? Like this feeble little voice. And this nurse comes and she looks at me and she's like, when did you get here? And I was like, I don't know. Can you get me off of this backboard? My body is hurting so bad. She's like, do you know what time you got here? And I said, I think I broke my back at 1. And she goes out to the nurse's station. She's like, you guys, this woman's been on a backboard for 2 hours. We need to get her off. And I can hear them talking, and I can hear the commotion. Like they don't know that I'm there. And then they come back and I was like, that was 1:30 in the afternoon. It was 3 in the morning. And they had like left me. And for the next week that I was in the hospital, every different person came by and was like, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. We're so sorry. You should never been left like that.
Wow.
I was like, if this is the US, you'd be sued, but obviously it's kind of not. And so I went from this like pretty high performing life to a screeching halt, laying in a hospital bed. I had surgery 4 days later by myself, and my then boyfriend, he didn't understand the severity of the injury. He called my brother and was like, do you think you could go pick your sister up from the hospital later? I think, I don't know. And my brother comes to the hospital and he's in his own crisis. He's like surprise pregnancy with their 4th child. And he just got that news like that morning. And so all he can think is like, 4 children. Like, what? And he comes and he's like, oh, fuck, this is serious. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. That time just laying in my bed, this is like pre-social media. I had a BlackBerry, I had a BlackBerry. It wasn't Facebook. It wasn't like scrolling. I didn't have that entertainment. And of course, being on painkillers, if anybody's been on painkillers, you don't have the capacity to read. I couldn't even read People magazine, let alone a book. So I was just there. Kind of like a forced silent retreat with opiates. Like, what?
Not so different to an ayahuasca trip.
Yeah, exactly. And in that time, I realized that, first of all, I broke my back at the peak of my Saturn return in astrology. And I realized that there was no choice for me but to be living the path of a yogi. I'd been practicing by that time, doing the asana on my mat. And if I'm really honest, the first yoga class I ever took, the teacher was like, and we're starting a yoga teacher training next week. And I was like, that sounds like I should do that, but this is my first yoga class ever, like there was something in me that
Wow.
was like, this is what you're going to
Yeah.
do. But I didn't believe that, it was my first yoga class. I can't take my first yoga class and then become a yoga teacher. So there some time passed there. But that was, like you said, kind of like an ayahuasca journey. It wasn't that much unlike an ayahuasca journey. When you do ayahuasca, you're just faced with your ego and visions, and it's like a conversation with your soul. And I mean, I was just laying on my back in a kind of pain that I don't think I'd ever experienced before. I mean, I've given birth now, so that's totally different. But and completely by myself in silence with like a moaning elderly woman across toe to toe with me in the room,
Wow. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds like a profoundly life-changing experience.
Yeah. Yeah, she was hilarious.
Yeah.
That side note, she was hilarious. She was delusional. And she thought she had been abducted by aliens. And so I had to constantly reassure her that she wasn't abducted by aliens.
Then you were like, okay, once you had rehabilitated, and how long did that take? But once you did that, you were like committed. You did your yoga teacher training and you were like, right, I'm a teacher. And you were all in on that 100%.
Pretty much. Yeah. I got out of there the day after I had the back surgery. They got me on my feet into physical therapy and walking again. I'd already quit my job, so that was taken care of. Luckily, my boyfriend at the time, we were living together, and he had a great job, so he was able to float me. I was still actually had WestJet, and so I had insurance from them, so I had money coming in, which was nice. And I went and found one of my original yoga teachers. Her name's Ali Bogard, who I was at her first ever yoga class. I tracked her down because I had never found another teacher that I appreciated the same way. And even though because I moved cities, I went and found her and she was like, your timing is perfect. I'm doing a 4-day immersion, which is a prerequisite for my yoga teacher training. And I was like, great, sign me up. She's like, even better, I'm coming to do it in Edmonton. I was like, even better. So I did that, and I started teaching after that 4-day immersion. I didn't even finish my 200-hour training. I started teaching after that 4-day immersion.
The truth comes out.
Yeah.
But could you do that with a broken back? Like, how could you move
Well,
and do yoga?
you're moving right away. You're moving like
Oh,
like I
right.
said, they got
Okay.
me on my foot 4 days afterwards. I was in a brace. And there was some time. Like I think that was maybe 4 months after I broke my back when I tracked her down and started that immersion. And I was going to yoga classes at they're called Modo now, but Moksha at the time. It's a hot yoga studio, and I just laid there. I did like very minimal movements because I couldn't. And I was doing physical therapy and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just started teaching right away. I got a job at a architecture firm. They don't still know to this day that I wasn't certified. And then a yoga studio in town found
You're
out that
such a rebel.
a yoga studio in town found out that I was teaching and offered me a class, and I started teaching there, and I quietly finished my training in the background of
Yeah.
teaching. And then that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually worked as a flight attendant because WestJet was, even though I left the marketing department, I asked when I came back from traveling, I asked if I could be a flight attendant to my old boss. And she was like, are you serious? Your desk is still warm. And I was like, nah, I just need to travel. And so I was working the bare minimum. They had a casual position at the time. So I could, twice a month, I could go to Mexico and back. And that would be enough to keep my benefits. And so, yeah.
So the
Yeah.
universe really, even though you had to break your back to create the space to make this job transition, or let's just actually call it a soul transition, the
Yeah.
universe actually was completely on your side the whole time, supporting you and giving you the space. And I feel like that's something I've experienced in my life as well, that if you can let go and step into what the calling is, the universe will conspire to support you in doing that.
Yes, 100%, absolutely. And since then, I've continued to unpack that injury in so many different ways, and it's led me on more than one healing journey. Like the most profound healing journey is that I went to this healer in LA. Of course, there's like the most outrageous healers in Los Angeles, and this guy had me doing breath work. And in the breath work, I all of a sudden would go out, and it was like doing a DMT ceremony where I would go, like, I had to reorient myself to space, just purely off breath. I've never experienced anything like this. And he was totally psychic. And he was like, your grandmother's here. And I'm like, my grandmother? He's like, yeah, she's here. She participated in breaking your back. You needed to because you're about to lose the wisdom that you're a lineage keeper for. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, she's very clear that you need to go back to your homeland and discover your roots. She's like, your lineage has been lost and she wants you to go recover it. And what that healer didn't know is the next day I was literally getting on a plane to go to Norway, which my great grandmother's from Norway, my grandmother's from Sweden. And when I landed in Norway, a woman named Kelsey and she was the host. I was running a yoga nidra training there. She's really into ancestry and where we come from. And I had just done my 23andMe, and she looks at it and she's like, you're more Swedish than most of the Swedes I know. And I was like, oh, interesting. And she looked deeper and deeper, and she's like, oh my goodness. She's like, your bloodline is Sami. And I phoned my mom and I was like, Mom, 23andMe is telling me that we have indigenous blood. And my mom was like, well, your grandmother always talked about being a Laplander. She always talked about her family being the reindeer people, and like saying that you're a Laplander is not politically correct at all anymore. But that's what my grandma called herself. And it started this whole unraveling into this lost lineage of that, my grandmother, my great grandmother, they're all Sami people. And what does that mean? And was it a mistake that I wasn't raised in a religion? Was it, as it was always intended that I would be raised in nature with reverence to the sun and the moon and the cycles of seasons, which is exactly the philosophy and the lifestyle of the Sami people, where, the reindeer guided their migration pattern, and their calendar was not January, February, March, nor was it the same every year, because it was just governed by the seasons, and that is a huge healing journey, like bringing that information to my family. This last summer at our family reunion, it was met with very interesting responses of part of my family being deeply religious, not wanting to accept the fact that their mom, their mom is a Sami woman who, when we go into her roots, it's based in animism and shamanism. And like the original shamans are from Siberia, and the Sami people are from Siberia. And so that broken back experience then brings me into this place with this healer that then brings this whole lineage back to my family, where half my family's like, this is the coolest thing ever, we need to go learn. And the other half of my family is like, it must be on your dad's side. It's like the maternal
Complete
mitochondrial
denial.
line. Yeah.
I mean, if they were to even entertain it, would be an entire deconstruction of their realities, and
Yeah.
not ready for that yet. But at what point did you? Okay, so I was one of the blessed people to be in your final 200-hour yoga teacher training.
Yes, it was so magical.
Which I know, it was the most magical experience, and I talk about it all the time on the podcast. I'm interrupting this awesome chat to quickly tell you all about the free meditation I've created for peace, presence, and empowerment. It kind of sounds like a big promise, but when you break it down, a sense of inner peace comes from being present, because you're not feeling anxious about the past or worried about the future. You're simply with this moment here, right now. And empowerment is also a byproduct of presence, because what's the one similarity you notice about the people in your life who have the confidence to ask for what they need and want, not in a pushy or narcissistic way, but in a way that feels genuine, clear, and unattached to the outcome of their ask, which ultimately then makes you more receptive to fulfilling their needs and wants. That's true empowerment. And that one similarity that all those people have in common is presence. So this meditation is designed to give you a repeatable experience of presence so that you can begin integrating those feelings of peace and empowerment into your everyday life. I'd love for you to try it out, ideally 2 to 3 times a week for a month. I know it's a commitment, but you've got this. And let me know what starts shifting for you once you do. So pop onto our website, thehealingcocoon.co, that's C-O, not .com, and download your free audio track right now. And I've been so excited to have you as my mentor and my light on this episode. But at that time, you were doing yoga nidra, astrology was really big. What was the journey then? Because originally it started as yoga, but at what point were your psychic abilities opening? At what point did you get into yoga nidra? At what point did astrology come online?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you said psychic abilities, astrology, and yoga nidra.
Yeah.
My psychic abilities have always been there, right? And like I don't really talk about it that much because I think that it's not something that we necessarily talk about. But like when I was in university, I would sit in rooms and be like, that guy's sleeping with his best friend's girlfriend. Like, I just know it. I just knew it. I just always had that information.
Sentience, yeah.
Yeah, it was there. It was always there. And like I've gotten myself in so much trouble for saying things out loud that people aren't ready to hear. That's one of the projector's curses, I guess, but also through that psychic ability. So it's not that it's something that ever wasn't there. It's always been there. And I've always also had this really deep connection with spirit and source and nature that I understand how to listen for it. You know, like growing up in the middle of nowhere. And if you think of that movie American Tail, maybe I'm dating myself here, but American Tail with the little mouse like looking at the moon and like somewhere out there, you know, like that. I think that's like me. When I saw that movie, I'm like, that's me. I'm like the little mouse, like looking for her people, staring at the moon, looking for her people, you know? And so astrology has also always been with me. I grew up in a dark space. The sky was always where I went for solstice. I got myself in trouble in high school where I would we grew up on an acreage. We'd have bush parties or field parties or barn parties. And I would leave the party and go lay down and watch the northern lights or watch the moon or whatever. And sometimes guys would think that was me making a move at them. And I'm like, no, actually look at the sky. Like, I'm not coming out here to make out with you. Like, look at the sky, you know? And so that's also always been a big part of my life. And again, it was quiet, you know, like I didn't go advertising that I worship the moon. You know, I didn't go advertising that I had this deep connection with a particular star system that felt like home. That was just something that was just for me. And yoga really helped me to put some language to the mystical experiences that I've just always naturally had in my life. Also, I think that in the same way that people that grow up in abusive homes don't realize sometimes when it's like emotionally abusive, like not physically abusive, but emotionally abusive, they just think that's normal. I grew up thinking that the mystical experience was just normal. I grew up thinking lucid dreaming was just normal. I grew up thinking, you know, like that for me, that was normal. I thought everybody lucid dreamed. When you close your eyes at night, you go to this magical place and like play in another kingdom, right? No, that, you know, but that was normal for me. And so it didn't feel like it was something worth reporting. You know, it's only after training, you know, hundreds of yoga teachers and over 300 yoga nidra guides and listening to people's stories over and over and over again that I've come to realize that it's not normal. You know, it's the exception, right? And yoga nidra for me, it's interesting because I had a girlfriend in Edmonton. Her name was Jessica Ferguson, who lived at the Bihar ashram, and she was actually the assistant to one of the swamis. Like she would actually go on tour with him and then was the person that helped the transcriptions to be in proper English. She would always say, you have to yoga nidra, it'll change your life. And I was like, yeah, Jess, whatever. And I did go to her class. And it was a life-changing experience, but at that time I was more interested in big back bends and handstands than I was in the subtle body experience. But the further I went into my yoga practice, the more obvious it became that an advanced practitioner isn't the one that can do a handstand. The advanced practitioner is the one that can sense the most subtle experience within. And that subtle, that ability to sense the most subtle experience within only took every psychic experience or mystical experience that naturally happened for me and basically blew them up into experiences that I could then navigate, or that I could have a little bit more say in when they came about. And so when I actually, when I did my yoga nidra training, I trained with a woman who's absolutely incredible. Her name is Tanis Fishman. She she sent out a message. She was like, I don't think I'm going to run the training. She was doing it in Edmonton. I was living in LA. She was living in Edmonton, and she was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do the training. I don't have enough people registered, so don't book your flight. And I was like, hold up. And I just like got on my email list and sent an email out. And I was like, hey, everybody in Edmonton, the most incredible teacher's coming. You need to come do this training because I can't have her cancel it. I'm coming for the training. Like, let's go. And we filled the room. And so I did my training with her. And Tanis is a portal. Tanis is like, I don't even know if there's words. Like Tanis, I think, lives more in the ethereal realm than she does in the material realm. And the codes that she transferred to me in that week together, even though I slept through probably 75% of those yoga nidras, no joke, like snored through them. The codes that she shared in that training profoundly changed my life, you know? And when I became a mother and I was needing sleep in a different way, that's when I really started to respect the power of the practice. So, and then I just kind of hit the floor running with it, you know? It was like, obviously, this is what I have to do.
And so, two questions. When you say the codes that you received, just for anybody who's listening, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I know it's quite an obscure thing. People are like, well, what is the code? Like, how do you get the code? How would you describe what a code is?
Yeah, I could use more colloquial English, like wisdom
Colloquial.
teachings. Yeah, it was just straight up wisdom teachings.
Wisdom teaching.
Yeah, these are
Yeah.
wisdom teachings. These are ancient, infinite, timeless teachings. That's what they are. They're ancient, they're timeless, they don't belong to anyone. It's what she unpacked for me in that week was so much depth into the human experience. And what I found is every time I share the teachings, and also as I've gone into my yoga nidra practice, the teachings come through the practice. Like I'm constantly learning more about the human experience through the experience of yoga nidra itself, you know? It's you basically unpack all of the lies of what it is to be a human in a very short period of time, not by calling anything a lie, but by showing truth. And not just by showing truth, but by creating an experience where other people can experience that truth with a capital T for themselves. And what happens in that space, there's no words. There's no words. Like I've tried so hard to write a healthy paragraph on what yoga nidra is. Like, what's your elevator pitch on yoga nidra? Nothing I can say will ever get close to what the experience in the state is. There's nothing, there's no words, because what we're tapping into is an unlabelable place. Like there are no words, right?
Yeah, the truth of spirit.
Yeah. Well, and your connection, your, not just your connection, you are that. You are spirit. Like in yoga philosophy, we talk about the Maya, the illusion, but that's a concept. It's like we are not this body. That's a concept. There's so much of yoga philosophy that's a concept. But like no warrior 3 or no cobra pose is going to teach you the full transmission experience of yourself as spirit, not a body. And when we go into yoga nidra, the body falls asleep and the mind falls asleep and the ego falls asleep, and you actually just float in this vast open space of consciousness, of spirit, of source, of creator, self. Even now I'm like, these words, this is just so nuts, right? But then when you go in and you experience that, you come back and you're like, it is all an illusion. What a fun game we get to play, this human life. And all of a sudden, when you spend enough time visiting that space where the illusion no longer exists, the easier it is to be a human. All of a sudden, you're just like, oh, being a human could be fun. Being a human can be easy. We cannot take our suffering so seriously. And I know people are listening to me like, you don't know suffering. You're right. I don't know suffering. I know birth. I know complete loss of identity, like I know suffering, not from childhood trauma, but like a different kind of suffering. My second birth was the most excruciating pain I've ever felt in my entire life. And even that was a fun experience because of my experience in the state of yoga nidra. And also, when you're beginning the practice of yoga nidra, if you fall asleep, it's okay. You're still listening. When you die, your listening is the last sense. And some say, like in Tibetan Buddhism, they say your listening never goes away. So sure, my body's unconscious. My mind went unconscious, but a part of me is still listening. How long did it take me to stay aware? It just started happening. But I did, for a little while, state a resolve to remain aware throughout the practice. And that definitely accelerated the process of learning how to surf into those states. Because let's be real, your whole life, you've taught yourself that when you go to sleep, you go unconscious. That's what you've taught yourself. When the body goes to sleep, you go unconscious. You maybe go into a dream world. But now in the practice of yoga nidra, we're saying, let your body fall asleep, but remain aware. So we're undoing a pattern that is as many days old or as many days in your system as you are days old, right? So somebody who's starting this in their 60s, like think about what they're going to have to unravel to change that pattern. It's a big pattern to change. But I also quickly realized that if I could learn how to remain aware, because I didn't mention this before, but one of the biggest, most influential teachings in Buddhism is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And looking at people like the Karmapas or the Dalai Lama who reincarnate and remember their next life. I was always like, dude, I want that. Like, I want to remember. I want to choose my incarnation and I want to remember. And who's to say that we haven't done that already, But if I could figure out that transition, then I had a better chance of dying consciously. And so that was a big motivator as well, especially when my dad died and I was like watching him surf back and forth between this world and that world. And him at one point, he came back and he would go in these coma states and he'd come back and he'd always say like, am I dead? Am I dead yet? And I'd be like, Dad, no, you're still here. I'm so sorry. It will happen soon. He was like, just let me die already, And one time he came back and I knew he was super close then. He came back and he opened his eyes. He goes, oh, it's all love over there. It's so beautiful. Let me go back. And I was just like, Dad, you're so close, And when he died, I'm going to cry. When he died, one of the teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is don't cry because the sound of your tears is like thunder for them. And I didn't cry. And it was the most genuine not crying in that moment because I was like, Dad, you did it. You're free, because he wanted it so bad. And like I wouldn't say my dad had strong spiritual practice, but watching that navigation and him just like longing to go and then coming back with that information, like it's all love there. It's so beautiful. I was like, oh, Dad, that was the best thing you ever, like, thank you for that,
And so then how did it once now you were surfing this space yourself and you set the intention to stay conscious, how then did you access that or use that through the birthing process?
I think one of the greatest benefits of going to visit non-material states is to not fear the material states, because they're temporary and they're impermanent. And when you tap into your infinite self, you realize that this life is a blip. And so my first birth was 25 and a half hours long, and it was pure torture, and I was avoiding it. And I was, at every contraction, I was like, let me go into the least painful position. Like, I was resisting the cracking open of my body. I was resisting the pain of birth. My second birth, I was like dancing with it. I was like, bring it. I wasn't scared of it. And I knew that the genius design of the human body would have me forget that pain. And I also knew that the more present I could be with the pain, the quicker I would get to the pleasure of meeting my son. And what we do in the practice of Yoga Nidra is we play in the polarities. We play with yes and no. We play with dark and light. We play with pleasure and pain. And so I've gotten very good over the years of pendulating between these polarity states. And so I knew birth was an extreme polarity state, that if I could just stay present in the pain, I would be with the pleasure faster. And so knowing that it's impermanent, knowing that the pain is temporary, like anything in this physical realm is temporary, is what I learned. I know that now more than, there's no doubt that nothing is permanent. Even, the pandemic, I was like, I'm like everybody else, there was anxiety to the pandemic. Let's be real. People are like, oh, it was super cool as a cucumber. Yeah, sure, I was. And also that was messed up. Like, what kind of collective ayahuasca ceremony was that, But I also knew that it was impermanent, and so all of it is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. And so birth, instead of avoiding the pain, I went into the pain. And in that extreme, extraordinary sensation of body opening, I met it and myself and the goddess that is birth. And I allowed her to have her way with me. I moved out of my physical into that spiritual primal experience that women have been doing as long as humans, as long as mammals have existed. Like, you're not special because you gave birth. You're super special because you gave birth, but you're not. Like, billions. It's happened to billions. There's 8 billion people alive on the planet right now, but how many billions of people have existed in all of eternity? And we only count history in what we know to be history, but is our recorded history really the beginning of humanity? Like, we can't even fathom the number of times this has happened. And there is a life force behind it, and I gave myself to that life force. Like, that is a surrender that is unparalleled. And so, yeah, it was super painful, but it was fucking amazing. Like, it was amazing.
I mean, you make me just want to run out and do it. Like, what a like spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And you were saying this is something that women have been doing like for eons, generations and generations. And I wonder if birth has become a less spiritual experience, or even a harder experience, as the more we've been detached from ourselves as like conscious beings able to live between states, like live in the dream time the way the Aboriginals do and things like that.
Yeah, I do bite my tongue on this a lot, because I know that there's a lot of birth trauma out there, but I do think that we're robbing women of the greatest initiation of their life by medicalizing birth. I mean, I birthed my babies at home. After my first birth, I was like, I got to do that again. I can do better. Like, after I'd been through the experience, I was like, I could do that better. But we're robbing women of the most extraordinary experience of their life by overly medicating and medicalizing birth, for sure. Yeah. Well, I say that with conviction, and I know that I'm offending people, but do it. Just do it. I mean, I had a midwife. It's not like I did it irresponsibly. And of course, if there's something where your birth needs to be attended to, then get the help. But, you know, there was just a podcast with Joe Rogan said something like 50% of home births end up going to the hospital. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's actually less than 1% of home births transfer to hospital because
Oh,
birth is a
wow.
natural state. And so if you think about that, like less than 1% of home births end up in hospital, but we have like a 60 or a 30, I don't know what the percentage is in America, but like some countries have an 80% cesarean rate. Like
Mm,
we're so afraid of our power that we're robbing ourselves of it.
yeah. And I mean, that's a whole other discussion around the patriarchy and the repression of women and how powerful we are. And I think, like, wrapping this up, I'd love to bring all this whole journey around to what it is you have created now, which is Attune to the Moon, which is a really beautiful business based in astrology. And I guess how wonderful that you did study business when you were at university.
Yeah.
And if you want to tell us a little bit about, the mission of Attune to the Moon and what it is exactly, I know everyone would love to hear.
Yeah, so Attune to the Moon, I used to blog all the time about the moons, the new moon and the full moon. And when I was doing my yoga nidra practice, I realized that if I did my yoga nidra practice and then journaled, I was really connecting with the essence of that moon before I ever looked at the chart of that moon. And then I started guiding the practices, as you know, at Love Yoga Space in LA. And I would mix astrological themes in with the classes and the practices. And you probably remember Serafina. She was like, you should record these and put them out in the world. And I was like, yeah, right. Nobody cares. She was like, no, you should. And it took me like a year to do it. And of course it worked. I mean, not of course, but knowing where I am now, it worked. Um, and so Attune to the Moon has been around since 2015 when I started doing that, although more technically and more formally with a membership site since the pandemic broke. And so the site it's a custom build site where instead of using the clock and the calendar, the timing of the website is based off the position of the planets in the sky, the sun and the moon, the planets in the sky. And so the way that the website works is it's actually connected to NASA data, similar to, CoStar. It's connected to the NASA data. And in the back end, I have these essentially giant carousels, which are I hook practices on. So I hook practices in when the moon is in Cancer, or when the moon is in Leo, or the moon is in Virgo, or the sun is in the different signs. So that when you open up the website, you only ever see practices that are going to attune you to the current astrology in the sky. And as far as the concept goes, I mean, I thought it was cool, but also we see people experiencing decision fatigue. Everybody knows this. You turn on Netflix because you have a quiet evening and you spend the whole time trying to figure out what you want to watch, and then you don't watch anything. And so part of the idea is that when you open the website, there's never going to be more than 15 practices to choose from. And in fact, you only forward facing see about 4 or 5, and you pick the sun, the moon, or Venus, or whatever you want to attune to, and it's there. And then I also run virtual moon circles. But it's really interesting, the timing of you asking this question, because I'm in a deconstruction phase of my life, where I've been running these virtual yoga nidra trainings. We're just about to get started on the last one that I foresee myself running in this way, at least. I don't even know if I'll continue doing them, because I know I can see in my own astrology that come March of 2023, I'm meant to go into retreat because I'm due for another significant transformation. And I know my karma, that's going to be a big deal. And I also, I'm walking with my mom to her final days, and we don't, death is totally unpredictable. We don't know when that is, but in the same way that I prepared for birth and, got my stuff organized so that I could have more time with my children, I'm also preparing myself for death and grief so that I can chill more, because I think I'll lose my marbles when my mom actually dies. But The Attune to the Moon portal is so great. I mean, there's over 250 practices in there that I've been making. The first one I think was made in 2016. I've got 144 practices that each one is 7 to 9 minutes long, and it's the sun moon combination. There's 144 different sun moon combinations. And so if you
Wow.
join the
And when you,
membership, what's that?
sorry, I just to interrupt, when you say practice, is that a yoga nidra practice? Is it a yoga class? Like what exactly is it?
No, so the beginning of the audio, it's an audio, because I think we spend too much time on screens, and so a lot of it is
Mm-hmm.
audio. The beginning of the audio is just a teaching about the astrology, about the sun and the moon and that combination, and then it's an embodiment practice. So it's anything from breath work to meditation and visualization to physical work to journaling to short yoga nidras, mirror work. I mean, if you join the membership just for those practices over the course of a year, you would visit 12 areas of your life from 12 different perspectives. And people who actually do those, I get messages all the time. They're like, I'm only 3 months in and my life has totally changed. Like, this is the greatest gift. Thank you for this, and I spent a year making those and I made them so
Mm.
that they are universal. Those ones are literally just that sun moon combination, and they're open-ended enough that it allows you to have your own experience with it. And then the yoga nidra or the Astro Nidras are the main practice of those. And they range from 25 minutes or 22 minutes, I think is the shortest one, to 49 minutes. And they are also on rotation. So that's my main thing. And I just recently decided, as we're recording this, Mars is retrograde in my 10th house and on my midheaven. So it's about my career and re-looking at my career. And I just recently decided that I'm I'm quite quitting my own job. Not really, but I'm quite quitting my own world, not because I don't care, but because I deeply care. And it's time for me to retreat and recalibrate. And I know the quality of everything that I've created so far can live on and be in service while I go in and go through my own healing cycle. Because I don't
Mm.
want to wait for crisis to throw me into a healing cycle. I know that I know I can see in my astrology and I can see from circumstances of my life that I'm going to need time to rest, and
Mm.
because I created Attune to the Moon, in the iteration that it is at the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody else was resting, I was guiding, I was leading, I was holding space, I was holding hearts, I was helping to regulate, like I was co-regulating hundreds of people, and so I haven't rested, and it's my turn. I'm going to take a turn and I'm going to rest. And I also know that what comes out on the other side of that will not be the same as what it's been before. So I'm grateful for this
Mm.
beautiful catalog that I've poured my heart and soul into through Attune to the Moon. And I'm really looking forward to what the mystery has for me next.
I hope this episode has inspired you to keep going on what can sometimes be a tough road to inner peace and true happiness. If you want to dive deeper into what we talked about today, go to thehealingcocoon.co for show notes and all things personal growth. And don't forget, if you're loving The Healing Cocoon, then put that love into action and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And until next time, my friends, let's rise and shine together.